What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about if the euro could replace the US dollar. Now, to be honest, this is a topic that I think would get most Americans kinda on edge. It certainly caught my attention because for a long time now, the United States, we've had the privilege of the US dollar being the world's primary reserve currency. And we also, the US dollar is a currency that many countries choose to do international trade with. And this has had enormous benefits for the United States. And today I want to check out this video by TLDR News EU and learn about if the euro could actually replace the US dollar for all of these purposes. And I mean, given a lot of the recent events that have happened and the stuff that, America has been doing and our government has been doing, I wouldn't be totally surprised if a lot of countries are interested in getting away from the US dollar. So let's take a look.
For the best part of a century, the US dollar has been the world's dominant reserve currency. However, Donald Trump's protectionist policies, his upending of the global economic order, and a growing US debt pile now threaten to erode the dollar's reserve status.
That'll do it. It's just, when you hear the list of things happening, like the United States that we're actually doing like that, yeah, it turns out doing that kind of stuff, sort of pissing off the entire world with tariffs and policy decisions that affect everyone else, and turns out that might make people want to not really do business with you, not really want to use your money. Who would have thought?
And this might actually already be happening. The dollar's value as measured against a basket of other currencies has actually been falling for the past few months. And this Friday, the euro surged to a 3-year high against the dollar, despite a pretty weak European economy and Trump's tariffs, which should in theory make the dollar stronger.
See, I didn't even know about this. I feel like this is the kind of news that they really don't show much here in the United States. When it's news like, the euro is actually gaining value against the US dollar, you'd think that'd be like big, important news in the United States, but I haven't heard anything about this.
As a result, some European policymakers now argue that a stable euro could attract investors searching for alternatives to the dollar, and even replace it as the world's reserve currency.
Wow.
So in this video, we're going to take a look at why the US dollar is losing its reserve status.
Wow.
And why some people think that the euro has the potential to replace it as the world's reserve currency.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just going to skip their introduction here, but this is a great news channel, TLDR News EU. They're great. Is Trump giving the euro a chance to replace the dollar? Yeah, I can't overstate enough how advantageous it is for America to have the US dollar and it be so widely used for trade and reserve in the world, basically. Like the fact that there's so many things that make it beneficial to be the country with the US dollar or whatever currency is being used the most. So this is huge if this is changing. This says, is Trump giving the euro a chance to replace the dollar?
To get started, you need to understand the central role that the US dollar plays in the world's so-called reserve currency.
Okay.
A currency that central banks and other big financial institutions like to hold in their foreign exchange reserves because they're considered safe.
That's the crux of it, isn't it? I can already see a little bit of the writing on the wall here. Why would other countries not really have an appetite for the US dollar? Besides the fact that you just, I don't know, for lack of a better word, you might not like the United States, given a lot of the stuff that's been going on. But besides that, when you choose a reserve currency or something like this, you want that to be very, like they say, reliable, very stable, predictable. The America and the Donald Trump government is everything but reliable and stable and predictable. It's the exact opposite.
In that their value will remain stable and that they can reliably be used to buy other things. The dollar's reserve status has its roots in the post-war Bretton Woods Agreement, when the US decided that they wanted the dollar to be the center of a new international monetary order.
Of course we did.
The dollar became the only currency that could be directly converted into gold, with all other major currencies then pegged to the dollar at fixed exchange rates. While the US ditched the gold standard.
Really? I mean, it's kind of crazy. I think so many Americans take this for granted. So many Americans don't even think about how it's a privilege that the US dollar has this much power. It's not something that it doesn't have to be that way. It can change. It can go away. So I think that, I think this is really eye-opening for a lot of Americans, or a lot of Americans don't even realize this yet.
Standard in the early 70s, the dollar remained the world's dominant reserve currency, accounting for more than half of all reserves. Since its creation in 1999, the euro has held the second largest share of international reserves.
Okay.
And until about 2008, it appeared to be gaining on the dollar, increasing its share from 23.6% in 2002 to a peak of 27.6% in 2009.
Okay.
However, the Eurozone crisis in the 2010s, plus the fact that the US began growing faster than the EU in this period, undermined confidence in Europe. And the euro's share of global reserves fell to 19% by the end of 2015. Today, the dollar still accounts for 90% of global transactions, and its share of reserves has remained at about 60%.
So, yeah, there's two things here. There's the reserve currency that a lot of banks all over the world hold US dollars, as well as some amount of euros and other currencies as well, by the sound of it. And the other part of this is that the US dollar is used a lot for international trade, and both of these things are in jeopardy.
Nonetheless, in the past few months or so, there has been some more substantive anxiety that Trump's policies could actually erode the dollar's reserve status.
Yeah.
In short, Trump's unorthodox and erratic economic policies have undermined the dollar's reputation as a safe asset.
Yeah.
This became glaringly evident early this week when the American stock market fell at the same time as both the dollar and treasuries. Now, usually when the stock market falls, the dollar and US treasuries go up, because investors are moving out of riskier assets in the stock market into nominally safe assets like the dollar and US treasuries. The fact that all three fell together earlier this week is proof that investors are actually just pulling their cash out of America altogether.
Wow. People are just pulling their investments out of the United States, which is, it's not funny, but it would be funny if it wasn't so true and depressing. It's ironic, I suppose you could say, that the point of the tariffs was to increase investment in the United States in order for companies to avoid the tariffs. And now the opposite is happening right now. People are pulling out of the United States because it's seen as such a unpredictable, risky investment. Literally the opposite. Literally the opposite of what was intended. Who could have seen this coming? Who?
And no longer see the dollar as a safe asset, or at least not as safe as it once was.
Right.
Anxieties about the surety of the dollar have been further exacerbated by at least three other things. One, the obscene amounts of debt that the US is currently issuing, sparking worries about either a default or the US inflating away its debt. Two, Trump...
Yeah, I don't know if other countries, if you guys care about how much debt, or if it's as big a talking point, but in the United States, this is something that gets brought up somewhat frequently, is how much debt the United States is in. It's like between like 30 to 40 trillion dollars of debt. Like I feel as though no other country could possibly get away with that. And that is another perk of the US dollar being so strong and important, is that we can go into this massive debt, and other countries believe that we will pay it back. Because, well, at least you used to, because we used to have the image of a strong, resilient, consistent, growing economy, and that's going away. Anyway, yes, we are in the US is in so much debt. It's mind-boggling how much debt per person in it's crazy.
Trump's previous comments about devaluing the dollar to help America reindustrialize, and 3, his antagonistic attitude to
What was this? Devaluing to reindustrialize? I didn't hear about this one. Did Trump say this?
Inflating away its debt. 2, Trump's previous comments about devaluing the dollar to help America reindustrialize.
He says so much stuff, it's hard to even keep up. He has said, you're telling me Trump purposefully wants to devalue the dollar because that's going to do something good? Am I missing out on... At this point, I will say, most of the United States and news and a lot of people, a lot of Americans are upset with the current trajectory of the United States, and especially financially. The tariffs, the policies, the stock markets, the economy, it's all been bad. Nothing positive has come so far. And a lot of Americans are becoming very aware of that. So I guess I shouldn't be shocked that this was an idea. What was this supposed to do?
And 3, his antagonistic attitude to America's long-standing allies, and his enthusiasm for sanctions, which has made some investors anxious about the prospect of Trump seizing their dollar-denominated assets. Nonetheless, the big question for de-dollarization advocates has always been, what could actually replace the dollar? You might think that the yuan would be a good alternative, but that's not really the case, for at least 2 reasons. Firstly, China still has capital controls that effectively limit how much money can come in or out of the country via the CCP's influence over China's big banks. And secondly, the CCP actively devalues the yuan to keep its exports competitive. That's...
So China's currency was an idea. That's another, I just realized, another perk of having the world reserve currency, or the most traded currency, is the United States. The dollar is very highly valued, and we can print more dollars. Like, we're the only country that can just print money. Like, the very important for the world economy, this money, and we can just make more of it out of thin air. That's another benefit of having the world reserve currency, by the way. So, not that, so the euro, we're saying? That makes a lot of sense to me. There's a lot of European countries that use the euro. And therefore, there's already got to be a lot of trade going on currently with the euro, right?
Sort of just leaves the euro then. As we mentioned a moment ago, until the Eurozone crisis, the euro looked like a real contender, but weak growth and a sense that the European project had essentially stalled dampened enthusiasm. However, if American growth continues to slow and the EU continues to move towards deeper integration, then the euro might become the least bad option.
The least bad. The least bad. I'm sick of stuff being chosen because it's the least bad. Not that the euro is bad or anything. It's just like, I've heard that phrase so much in American politics, where it's like, well, they're the least bad option. It's like, stop. Stop. That's so bad we're saying that. We're not choosing the best thing because it's great. We're choosing the least bad thing.
Notably, this process might actually be helped by the issuance of more euro-denominated debt, which is something we're currently seeing happen in both Germany, where incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz has just scrapped the debt brake to allow for massive increases in defence spending, and at the EU level, where Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen is talking about issuing more joint EU debt to fund Europe's rearmament.
Okay.
This might sound counterintuitive. After all, you might expect that if European countries were issuing lots of debt, this would be a symptom of their economic weakness, and therefore make the euro less attractive as a reserve asset.
Sure.
But one of the big reasons that the dollar has been able to hold on to its reserve crown for so long is because treasuries, i.e. US debt, are the world's favorite debt instrument. You could even call treasuries the world's reserve bond. Again, somewhat counterintuitively, the fact that the US government borrows so much money, which involves issuing loads of treasuries, is perhaps the main reason that they're the world's reserve bond. And having so many treasuries floating about makes them attractive for two reasons. Firstly, they pay a non-trivial interest rate, and secondly, they're super liquid, i.e.
So, issuing debt like this, selling bonds, and is not a bad thing. And it's actually something that the world reserve currency would do. So I think that's the point they're just making.
You can always find a buyer for treasuries if you want to turn them back into dollars. This creates a sort of self-reinforcing loop. Dollars become more attractive to hold because they can always be used to buy treasuries, and treasuries become more attractive to hold because you know that they can always be sold for dollars, with both reinforcing the other's reserve status. Anyway, this is one of the reasons that German bonds, for instance, let alone EU bonds, have never really been able to replace treasuries. There just aren't enough of them floating about, which means that the market for them isn't particularly liquid. However, investors fled to German bonds last week when Trump's tariffs sparked treasury sell-offs. And if confidence in the dollar wanes at the same time that both Germany and the EU, perhaps the two most trustworthy entities in Europe, start issuing lots of new bonds, the euro and euro-denominated bonds could eat away at the dollar treasury complex.
Okay, this is complicated. I'm not a finance expert by any means or anything, but it sounds like the debt issued by Europe and specifically Germany, like there's not enough of those transactions going on at any given time to make them super liquid, meaning that there's money and capital and buyers and sellers ready at any moment so that you can do everything you need to do with a world reserve currency. But based on some of the activity going on now, that's kind of changing and it's becoming more active. And I guess that's an important thing when you're trying to be the world currency. It's starting to make sense to me why the US dollar has been so resilient up until this point. There's so many of these things in place already that kind of reinforce why the US dollar is the world sort of, a lot of the world global trade is done in dollars and backup reserve currency is held in dollars. And that makes sense to me now because it's actually quite difficult to set up that infrastructure. But that doesn't mean we should just sit back and, as Americans, like, we definitely doesn't mean we should just sit back and be like, okay, it'll always be like this. Yeah, like, because no.
All in all, while the euro is unlikely to fully replace the dollar anytime soon, it could plausibly occupy a larger share of reserves as the world moves to, at least partly, diversify away from the dollar.
I see.
And
is that I think that's the end there. Okay. That makes sense to me. So basically, the US dollar is it's safe for now, but the world is changing. That's kind of the takeaway from this video. It's that Americans need to realize the world is changing and trying to get away from US investment, and that means the US dollar. And that can happen, and it's starting to happen. So yeah, this is just something I really wanted to take a look at. This was really eye-opening for me because this is just a whole thing. We don't really talk about this kind of stuff here in the United States. So this was great. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on any of the stuff we discussed here today. That'd be cool to hear about, especially from European countries out there who maybe use the euro. Yeah. So, and if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.